We're ready to go. So good morning, everyone. I'm Ron Cisler, Dean of the College of Health and Human Services. You know that, and Mariann Vorva, our business manager. And we wanted to just have an opportunity to present a little bit on the strategic resource management approach to our budgeting and finance at the university. As a sort of a, just a primer of what we're doing at the university, and then we will drill it down to our college. And then talk a little bit about the strategic allocation plan, which is really a nice term, a very important one for subvention and what we're doing to look across colleges and looking at a balancing of the financial picture across colleges. So thank you for being here. This is recorded, but I guess if you have questions later, that will be recorded as well from the microphones throughout the room. So we're good to go. So I want to give a little bit of a refresher on what we did prior to the implementation of the strategic resource management. And that was the historical incremental budget model. And I typically say that it was historically and pretty much a pattern of an increment downward, right? Typically a reduction. Rarely did we, before I got here and when I just started, did we get an increment upward to our budget. It typically was downward as cuts. But with that model, each unit leader, and I'm talking about at the college level now, and then some of it rolled to the departmental level, but we were responsible for the management of direct expenses only. Those dollars that went directly, typically 95.5% to people, to salaries, and then the balance to other things like travel or supplies expenses and so on. But they're all direct, not indirect for infrastructure. And it was according to a centralized budgeting, and again, it was typically downward as cuts, and there were the budgeting decisions were at the central level. So they changed year to year. We would find out late in the year and sometimes early in the year what our budget was most often. And it was typically across the board, increases or decreases. And with some other incremental changes, those were in response to decisions typically made by the institutional leadership. But for example, we would have things that we initiated. For example, when I came, we were implementing the Department of Physical Therapy, right, Amy? I don't think you were quite here yet. But we requested from the university the funds in total to cover the faculty and staff that we needed for the DPT program. So we got a bolus of funding at that time, which was new to our college for that program. Now we had to say, well, here's the model, here's the pro forma of, here's the number of students we're bringing in, the tuition, the course fees, and so on, and here's the number of faculty to say that we could run this program with X budget. So at that time, indirect costs were largely invisible. We didn't know who paid for space, who paid for the maintenance for the space, the upkeep, and all of those things we just assumed were being covered, and the larger business and finance and leadership of our campus knew how to pay for those resources. So we only saw what was left and what we needed, either with an increment with the new program or traditionally a decrease to run our units. There were no inherent incentives for efficient use of resources or for growing programs. And we're hoping that the SRM will change that a little bit. What we're calling, of course, is the strategic resource management is a version of responsibility-centered management. And responsibility-centered management is all about revenues and expenses, both the direct and the indirect. And these are allocated to revenue generating units according to a set of rules, and I'll get into them, and Mariann will get into them as well. At WMU, there are 7 academic colleges, as you know, and those are the revenue generating units. Excuse me, we have other colleges, of course, the library, the graduate college, we have Merz Tate College, but for a lot of reasons, with the tuition primarily, the student tuition is tied to the revenue generating units in our discipline focused colleges. Year-to-year changes in budget, increases or decreases, as we'll get into, are driven by change in the revenue and expense in the revenue, that ratio of revenue and expense in those revenue generating units. We're going to get much into that. Budgets may also be changed via changes to subvention or what we're calling strategic allocation, and or by strategic changes determined by institutional leadership. So I can give you some examples where we've gotten extra funds, at least startup, for a program to initiate it, but then we're going to have to take it on as a college. We'll give plenty of examples later. And it's intended to make direct and indirect costs more visible and transparent. And has everybody seen the full budget layout, SRM modeling? It's available on the website under SRM for anyone to view, not just internal to our college, but elsewhere. And it is to incentivize both efficiency and growth. So there's some things that we've been grappling with and looking at related to the RCM implementation decisions for our campus. Again, we're calling it RCM. We're following RCM principles. We're calling it SRM as a strategic resource management. But typically if universities take this on, they will look at the timelines, the frequency of rules and the revision of those rules, the time period of an initial, let's say, period of implementation, and things like what are we using to determine a budget for the subsequent year? Do we use just the previous year? Do we use numbers which really come too late for us to accurately even estimate for a given year? Do we use the previous year or 2 previous years or 3 previous years and so on? Those decisions all have to be made. And then what are the rules to allocate that revenue? Undergraduate tuition and fees, graduate tuition and fees, state appropriation here and we're pretty fortunate here in the state of Michigan. I came from a state where it's about 16% appropriation to the budget. Here it's about 26%, so we're more fortunate here. Both states, I think, in the heyday was like in the 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s, I think 50% funded by state appropriation. That's decreased over time. F&A revenue is part of it. That's indirect costs off of grants and contracts. Course fees, differential tuition. We don't have any differential tuition here. Something we might want to look at. And then other miscellaneous income, including, not in the book budget, but including like philanthropic dollars, as well as our, actually, let me take it back. Other dollars, let's say continuing education or things like that. Philanthropic dollars are not part of the RCM, just to make sure. And then some of the rules to allocate the indirect expenses, for example, space. And facilities and operating costs for non-generating unit expenses. And we call these kind of cost centers. And that's the infrastructure or indirect costs that are covered by the university. And how do we account for those? How do we allocate resources for those? Do we look at them every year? Do we change them? Do we ask for efficiencies and that type of thing? So those are all things that went into the initiation of what we're calling our a traditional RCM into an SRM approach. So Mariann's going to now talk about some of the SRM rules that we have taken on with WMU and then applying it to our college when it comes to the revenues.
Thank you. So SRM runs on a 5-year initial model where it looks at revenue and expenses that are average over the prior and current year to determine what is going to be projected for the following year. And some of those rules that SRM looks at, as Ron had mentioned just now, undergraduate student tuition and fees, where all actual tuition is paid and distributed among colleges based on the percentage of share of undergraduate student credit hours that are taught. Also graduate student tuition and fees, tuition paid distributed among colleges based on the percentage of FTE of graduate headcount enrolled in the college. And if you look there, it explains how 1 FTE equals greater than 6 credit hours for fall and spring. Anything greater than 3 credit hours in the summer, for summer 1 or summer 2. And 0.3 FTE for students enrolled in fewer credits, less than 6 credit hours, where 1 FTE is the equivalent of about $15,000 a year. Another revenue allocation that SRM looks at is state appropriation, which is distributed among colleges based on the percentage of total FTE headcount, that's undergraduate and graduate as well. Other revenue allocations, as we mentioned earlier, F&A, where the percentages are distributed among 70% for the college and 10% for PIs and 10% for the departments. I don't think that changed. The percentage for departments and PIs didn't change. I think it was the same before SRM. So that remains the same. A quick note, and we'll talk about UPA in a second in the next few slides. But just a quick note with the percentages that are applied to PIs and to departments. Those percentages are full rates that are not subject to UPA tax. Other revenues, differential tuition.
I think because there are some investigators here, I want to clarify a little bit on that though. That the full 10% off of the full indirects generated will go each 10% each to the PI and to the department. 10% is also given to the Office of Research and Innovation. So that's why it doesn't add up to 100. Then, so 70% is allocated to the college. However, the UPA, and maybe this is the first you're hearing of, the UPA is the University Participation Assessment. That's a tax, right? And it's 43, and we're going to talk more about it, but 43.15. What happens is the college gets 70%, but the college is taxed the 43.15. It comes from that 70%. I know it's a little complicated. And the 43.15 is on the full, the 90% after ORI is paid. So ORI is paid, then 43.15 is charged to that 90% of the F&A out of the college's amount. So what ends up is that the college has like 1.5% more than it had in the incremental budget model. I know it's somewhat complicated, but what's the important takeaway, if you're a PI, you get your 10% of the full indirect costs that are generated by your work. And so does the department.
Minus the 43%.
No, the PI.
So if it's $100,000 to start with,
they get 10% the PI.
Of the 100?
10,000 out of the 100.
43% under 70% then?
No, the PI gets 10,000 out of that 100,000. The department gets 10,000. That and ORI gets 10,000. When we don't get 70%, we pay all
Wow, okay.
the UPA on 90,000. So you take that out of our 70%, and that's what the colleges have to. I forget the amount. It's like, I should know this. It's like 38,000 would come to the college, which is actually maybe not even that much. Which is actually a little bit more than we used to get in the incremental budget.
Yeah, so the tax is covered at the
Yeah.
college level.
I should probably have a whole new slide on that distribution. trust me.
Yes, we probably will.
Okay,
do
sorry.
that in the future. No, that's totally fine. So to continue, differential tuition, which we don't have currently, and course fees, which we do have, they're allocated directly to the colleges. And in addition, revenue support, any internal funds from other WMU units. So for those of you that are familiar with object codes, internal funds will be shown and seen in the 8995 object code. And those are allocated directly to the college as well, college units, and any miscellaneous revenue, so any external revenue that's coming from outside the university. For example, any conference fees, continuing education revenue as well. So then we move forward to expense allocation rules that include direct expenses, so your faculty and staff compensations with fringe included, your operating dollars, GA, DATA tuition, part-time instructional costs, summer instructional costs, and any other direct expenses that are paid by college units. So this, when we're talking about direct expenses, we're talking about the booked budget that is attributed to cost centers within the college's units, departments, and schools. Other expenses, course fees that are expenditures allocated directly to the college, F&A, again, 20% that's allocated, the 10% that's allocated to the PIs and the departments. Space allocation, we're looking at space allocation now, debt services, any custodial maintenance utilities, anything that's allocated based on our assigned square footage, which our square footage in the college runs to about $12.86 per square foot. And we're talking about college square foot and a portion of EWV as well.
The top level where PT is.
Where PT is.
We don't pay, we pay rent, I think, for CDS and Unified to the university for Unified clinics and CDS.
And then the University Participation Assessment, otherwise known as UPA for short, which is just a flat percentage of all revenue that equals to 43.15%. And it's mainly used to cover any cost for the non-generating units, so all service units in the university. That is what it is attributed to.
And one exception is auxiliary units, because they are supposed to serve the community. So Unified and CDS, we don't pay the 43.15% on any revenues there. If not, we wouldn't be in existence. But because we're serving our patients, we do get some money from CMMS or CMS and other sources. That's a 4.01% tax, if you will, or UPA, for auxiliary units.
For auxiliary units.
Things like Fetzer, Miller, and our CDS and Unified.
And Unified Clinic. So now we come to our budget in the college for this fiscal year. Generated, of course, from the last 2 years. These are the projections that we have for this year, what we're projected to generate. For undergraduate tuition revenue, we're looking at 6.7 million. Graduate tuition revenue.
I think 16.
16. Did I say 16?
Yeah, 6.
16, I apologize, 16.7 million. Graduate tuition revenue is 13.1 million. Again, we don't have any revenue coming from differential tuition at this current time. State appropriation, 17 million. Indirect cost recovery, so that's our 90% pre-tax That's $432,590. Course fees generating, we're estimating to generate around $498,117. Revenue support, so again, our internal transfers that are not subject to UPA tax, so any internal revenue transfers from one department to another, 77,638. For a total revenue of $47,952,345.
We can show a slide of minus expenses to see.
Oh, here we go.
Yes, that's coming up next. Here are our expenses. So again, expenses, we're looking at direct book budgets. So for the college, our booked budget this year is at 19.9 million, pretty close to 20 million. F&A, 20% for the PI and department. That is an estimated amount of $96,131. That is actually distributed based on historical data from ORI because they monitor and track all the data for F&A, so that is the amount that they are projecting for us. Course fees, $498,117. GA and DA stipend and tuition, $454,616. This is the allocated amount that we receive every year. It's a set amount, not subject to increase from the university. So that is the amount that was provided to us to cover, I'm drawing a blank, to cover stipend and tuition for our GAs and
Tuition
DAs.
remission.
And it's distributed by percentage, I believe, among the schools and departments here in the college. Space cost, 2.4 million. Again, the university participation assessment based on the revenue that we are expected to generate is 20.6 million. That's 43.15% of all our revenue. For a total of expenses, including space cost and I'll just say UPA, of 44.1 million. So if you subtract our total revenue from our total expense, we're looking at a subvention, or otherwise known as strategic allocation, of 3.8 million, which Ron will talk about in further detail in another slide.
So it's in green for a reason, because that should be our what we have left over, right? So we underspend by 3.84 million from the expenses that we have, but it's allocated somewhere else. And this we can.
Yes, the 3.8 million isn't monies that will be coming to the college. It is allocated elsewhere. And this is just a summary of the previous two slides, just in nicer, clean detail. You take our revenue and our expenses, subtract our revenue expenses, less than the UPA at 43.15%, less the space cost. We're left with revenue of 3.8 million, which is strategically allocated to other colleges. And those other colleges are those that actually have more expenses than what they generate in revenue, more expense costs.
So basically, they subvented all the money in the black.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes. So to summarize, in short, we are positioned as a college very well financially this fiscal year in comparison to other colleges who are not doing so well, generating 3.84 million more in revenue than what we spent. Subvention return model again continues to be adjusted. We are anticipating about a $280,000 return this year, one time. And we're continuing to work with chairs, directors, and administrative staff just to review all the details of our accounting, making sure that we're up to speed and we're doing well continuously. And we're also working with our college council leadership just to fine tune any details as we plan for next year, to plan for next year's. And we do anticipate again that there will be some slight ongoing shifts as the university and academic affairs, all the colleges, as we continue to learn and adjust to this new model.
So let me make a couple of comments about the last two bullets. So with our College Council leadership, for example, we've made some decisions on in a couple ways. One was how to allocate space across our college. Do we go about counting square feet everywhere and then distribute it as it's actually used? There's a lot of general space, right, for students can come in and out. Do we take into account the EWB? How do we actually go about when we look at our department level distributions? How do we cost that out? And we want to be simple and we want to be elegant and fair across our college. So we grappled with that issue about space, and we decided that we would proportion it to revenue. Rather than, rather than based on kind of the modes of instruction. And the university, I think, could benefit from doing it this way a little bit too. And I'll get into that when I talk about the subvention a little bit more. So we've already had discussion. Another level of discussion we had is we value accessibility for our students and for our faculty. And accommodation costs, we would have that kind of at the college level so that we can use a pool of funds for departments rather than at a department level. Because at a department level, it would mean that if we want to have accommodations for our faculty, staff, or students, that if it's a value at the department level and you go about it, in a way you're kind of penalized because then you have to pay for it. So what we said, it's the value of our college. Let's keep it at the college level and incentivize providing accommodations for faculty, staff, and so on, like sign language and other types of things. So we're making decisions already on how our college is going to operate. With shifts in the SRM, this is an initial 5-year model. And you'll see this a little bit more played out when I talk about subvention, because everybody wants to know about subvention. I think we all understand the first part now, right? But it's the subvention we're really curious about. And I think there will be tweaks over time to the subvention framework, right? Because we don't want to over penalize some units where we value what they're doing. Let's say fine arts, we value that. It's a high profile college. It's highly rated in, I think is it dance particularly?
Jazz studies.
What?
I think it's jazz studies.
Yeah, and they're looking at their programs on their enrollments and all of that too along the way. We can talk a lot about this. But we will probably making some tweaks. Here's an example I'd like to give. Some people even thought that we should count space by cubic foot. That was an original thought. And think of it, especially in the performing arts, you have these huge spaces. Can you imagine the cost of, not Miller, but there's Dalton and there's another.
There's a bunch of them.
A bunch of them where we're talking about large performing spaces, and that would be ridiculous. Actually, I want to make a statement that a lot of fine arts has, I think, $6 million in costs for space alone. Think about that. Attributed to their college already. Think if we went with cubic feet, it would have been even more. Whereas we have 2.4 million in space costs. They have 6 million. I'll show you some graphics here. Some of their deficit is due to their large space costs alone, and I'll get into that. So there's a lot of things, so don't be surprised if tweaks are made along the way. We're learning the model. We're going to try to perfect it over this 5-year period of time. So, strategic allocation. Remember, this is a SRM. It's not an RCM. If it was a full RCM, that 3.4 million that we have extra, we would keep it, right? We generated it, we only have this much expense, we're gonna put it in the coffer or take that money and reinvest it in some other way immediately or over time. This is not a strict RCM, it's a SRM, it's strategic. So we have a strategic allocation pool or strategic allocation that will be happening every year. The first year in the hold harmless year, which was last year, whatever your revenue and expenses were, the university covered it. And that was the transparent look on where revenues are and expenses are in the 7 colleges. And the UPA, the indirect costs of running the university, was then determined at that time. What do we do from there moving forward? So this first year that we're in sort of second year, but we'll call it now the first year as it relates to the subvention or strategic allocation. Year 1 was hold harmless. Let's talk about first year being now we're going into the strategic allocation of funding our 7 units at the university. And a subvention are funds that are reallocated from a unit that has revenue exceeding expense to a unit that has expense that exceeds revenue, very simply. The initial subvention is model dependent. That is, it is based on what we see as the rules that we applied in that hold harmless year. Now we're going to have that as a starting point. And it depends on those revenue expense allocation rules. Institution using an RCM approach, we need to decide how to handle these subventions moving forward. Initial subventions may be held constant. We could have decided to take whatever we found in that first year, that hold harmless, and we could have just let them, that same subvention continue, and then use that as our baseline, right? That's one way we could have done it. And that could be done in perpetuity. Those units would get that subvention at that level. The units that are providing that would be hopefully maybe could even increase some revenues. And so the other units, but we could use that as our baseline and keep it going into perpetuity. Subventions may be decreased or increased over time. That's another framework. And we may have expectation of $0 subvention at some point, and that would be a pure RCM. We're not doing that. We're doing the one in the middle. We're not gonna give the subvention into perpetuity. We're not gonna be at 0 subvention. We're gonna do something in between. So subventions often reflect activities that generate less revenue than they cost. Think about, for example, small course enrollments. We have labs that are low enrolled and they are really costly. Some of our graduate programs are more costly because of that extra hands-on. We have even some of our undergraduate programs that require clinical rotations and there's accreditation that required student-faculty ratios, like nursing, social work, and others. Many of our other graduate programs have sort of a look at student-faculty ratios.
We ask a question as we go along. Or
Sure,
something.
yeah, but that's fine.
So in my mind, this subvention that we have here is our profit, more or less. You want $3.8 million. If we would have spent some of that money, we'd have less money for them to.
Yes.
Okay, so what's his incentive is to spend the whole $3.8 million, but you may be stuck with it if it's not allowed going forward. So you don't want to commit to it.
So remember, that when we went into the hold harmless year, the expenses that we had that first year are what was allocated to us in the original incremental model. First of all, I know that as we prepared for the SRM, we couldn't go on a spending spree. Why? Because we only had so much money in the year previous. We couldn't overspend. In fact, there's a story behind that. We thought we actually did overspend in the year prior. And we're this close to taking out a loan from academic affairs. Do you remember this? Do people remember this? Where we felt that we thought in our early projections that we were going to overspend. And it was somewhat because of a transition misunderstanding that we overspent in the first place. In fact, it was a really good overspend because I think we spent something like $400,000 over, but we brought in $10 million to the university in doing that. So it was good for the university, but we overspent our budget. And this was the whole thing with EUP or WMUX at the time in the dollars and so on. It was a misunderstanding. Anyway, we never overspent, and we didn't have to take a loan, no interest loan from academic affairs at that time. So we end up balancing our books at the end of that year.
As you look forward, obviously, as long as they keep the UPA rate the same, they don't mess with that 43% of what's.
Yeah,
what's
that's
in
another
policy.
thing we can talk about. We can talk about UPA.
So how do you plan out? Obviously, you know what your subvention rate's gonna be year 2, 3, and so on.
I have an answer for that.
Okay.
And it's in some of the, after I explain the subvention, I have an answer for that. And it's kind of around very carefully. And being very frugal on decisions moving forward, and I'll talk more about that. Good question. So here's the subvention as we currently sit with our colleges. We have the 3 colleges that are in the, you've seen some of this. I think I presented it back in December, Mariann and I. And then we have 4 colleges that are in the red. And it's about $16 million, give or take, rounding, of the subvention that's given from colleges that are making more revenue than their expense to colleges that are expending more than they bring in revenue-wise. Look at CFA, $6.25 million. They have an expense of $6 million alone in space. Now, we all have space costs, so you have to factor that in. But it's a lot of their costs are tied up in space, and in the way we have our rules, they're responsible for $6 million or so in space.
And you likely can't mothball a theater or 2, can they? So it's not
That's
really a
another
choice,
thing.
they're stuck with
We
it.
have a campus that I've heard is 1,200 acres. Now, it's not just the campus here proper, I think because of engineering and different, the owner, we own 1,200 acres. I came from Milwaukee. We had the same number of students, same number of faculty, we had 91 acres. Now, our buildings were up, ours are spread out. What do we get rid of? What do we don't? If we mothball a space, some buildings are being torn down to accommodate that. I think we're selling off parts of our campus right on the periphery, if I'm not mistaken. I think we sold land to a health Bronson, I think, not too long ago, about 3 years ago. So I think there's an opportunity there. A lot of that land was, I don't know how it was acquired, but some of it was even gifted to the university over time. So that's our picture across the colleges. So here's where it gets kind of fun and interesting. We have a handout because I know you can't see that. So, and some of this is, you'll have to forgive me. I'm going to go through this because I think this is where I think people need to understand where our university is moving forward related to that strategic allocation or the subvention rules over the next 5 years. And we already started with this year. This is year 1, and I'll explain some of that. So it's a little bit strange, but bear with me. So there's basically 3 pools that we're considering strategically over time. And that is the first one, let's go. The allocation pool on the right is really dollars coming back from the positive colleges, a portion of it coming back to that college over time. The one in the middle is how is that college performing compared to the other colleges? Are they doing a better job in maybe making investments that are returning on that investment or not? Some of it gets influenced by whether or not we get money back, which changes our overall revenues, they give us more revenue. And if we keep costs low, we can get money out of here. But if we reinvest those money, which we should, for the benefit of the university and the college, then we may not get as much out of this incremental pool. And it's all proportionate to each other of the 7 colleges. The third one is quality indicators and performance of the colleges. And I'll explain this as we go. Need some water. So, year 1, the way it works is the colleges in the positive put 100% of their positive, what they are positive, we have 3.84 million, into this allocation pool. All of it, year 1. The colleges that are negative put 10% of their negative into a pool. So they don't have the money, but they conceptually put it 10%. So let's say CFA is 6.7, what are they, 6.7 in the negative, let's say, or 6 million. They would put 600,000 into this pool. We would put 3.84 million, and so on for all of the colleges. Year 1, 10%, they're giving back in concept, they're cutting.
Oh, so the
College
10%
of Fine
realized by
Arts
cuts, not
is,
by actual.
well, they're taking 10% of the amount that they're in the red, and they're putting it here, conceptually. Just hold on to that.
So Ron,
It
just
goes
to clarify,
into-
so if we're using these numbers, right?
Yep,
Then this allocation pool is essentially now $3.2 million. Cause we put in 3.8 and they're essentially taking out
10%.
10% of their.
Just for those two, and then you add in
Everybody
HCOG,
else.
there's in
Right.
So it goes the other way, they take out 10%.
Well,
Right, 'cause if they're
let's
adding in
just,
a negative.
just, let's do it conceptually first, because this is all conceptual. Because then we divvy up that pool. So the allocation is that the college, allocation pool, the colleges in the positive, whatever they're in the positive at the end of that first year, right, that hold harmless year, they're putting in this allocation pool, all of it. Conceptually, those that are in the red, they take 10% and put it in that pool. You'll see here, they get 90% of that back, conceptually, now, remember, right, on paper, as an estimate. So they get they get to keep 90% of what they are in the red. So, right? All right, so in year 1, the way it's distributed from there, so if we take all of, remember there's about $16 million that were in the green, in the positive, versus 16 million in the red. You take all of the 16 million that we are in the positive, goes here, and then 10% of 16 million would be 1.6 million. So this total pool would be 17.6 million with all the colleges, right? And then from there, we're gonna divvy it up in these 3 ways. Year 1, so 40% of this pool gets reallocated to the colleges in the positive. 17.6 million, 40% to here. In this allocation pool, actually wait. Then we back off the 90% back to the colleges that are negative. So 90% of that pool, remember, most of it paid by these colleges, gets put back to the colleges in the negative. Does that make sense? Because we have to pay for those colleges still. Whatever remains, wish I had it maybe in my example. This is a little off because it's our current year, but whatever would remain would be about, let's say it's about $1.567 million remains in this pool then. Then we distribute it 40, 40, 20. So does that in
Yeah.
concept make sense? Because the 10% goes here, and basically we're saying, really, in a way, we could have just done this. The 90% they keep. And actually, this is kind of off, because you should be 100%, but they keep 90%, and 10 is really left in that pool. So this kind of should be like an arrow. But we pull it up, and so they keep 90% of what they are in the red. 10% they have to find somewhere. So fine arts has to come up with 600,000 or whatever it was in that first year. It's a lot.
That's
Okay.
per year then, next year they have the same problems.
Yeah.
So how do they decide if you go to the C, D, or E route?
Okay, so what happens though, that it's maybe not as bad as fine arts having to come up with 600,000, because we distribute only 40% of it is back to the colleges in the positive. 40% is on whether or not they were above or below in their ratio of revenue and expense compared to last year. Bear with me here. And then 20% through the quality indicators. Well, let me tell you that we weren't able to fully implement this in year one because this couldn't be done because we didn't have a year to compare to yet. So we couldn't compare it to the hold harmless year because we hadn't even begun the model. So that indicator, that distribution was put on hold. And the quality indicators we're still working on. And most of the reason for that is because we have a new provost who is coming on board, and we wanted the provost to have some influence on the quality indicators. We have some examples of what we want to do, and I have a handout for that, but let's don't get into that yet because we have to look at this. Year one was the 1090 on what positive college, what a negative college would contribute to the subvention. Year two, it's 2080. Year three is 3565, and so on, 50-50 and 65-35. So that by year five, the colleges in the negative will be contributing. They have to give back 65% of what they are in the negative.
So it's not gonna work likely, I mean.
Well, let's hold off on that. No, I have some concerns, but we all do, right? And I think we are allowing for tweaks to the model. We've already tweaked it. That's okay. It's a start. And it's a start and it's a look-see on how this will distribute over time. But notice something else here, though, that these distributions change too. So that in that one reallocation to the positive colleges is going to go down to 0 by year 5. So what it really will do, it should bring everyone kind of toward that 0. Someone, I think you said, well, why didn't we start out really close to the line? We couldn't overspend that year leading in, but I think that is a good place to be, right? We want to be invested in at the level of our expenses. And when we get some of these funds back, we want to reinvest them in a really good way, in a way that has a return on investment for the college and university. And we just can't think of our college because we care about the rest of the university. We rely heavily on CAS. And CAS is how many million right now in the red? CAS is almost 5 million in the red. We rely heavily on them in the biomedical, biochemistry areas. So mathematics and all kinds of things, languages, English, all kinds of things. So I won't step into everything. We've run our own numbers on over time, what we think this is, but things may change. I don't know that I want to publicly state where I think how much we will get back over time, but it's could be pretty substantial over time, and we have to figure out within our leadership and teams, how do we reinvest? What do we invest in? But I always want us to think of investing in proper ways for a good return on that investment for the university and our college. It can only bring everybody up, right? Now, a lot of this is also dependent on enrollment. Hugely dependent on enrollment, if you don't know that already. So we're doing this at a time when enrollments are decreasing. We're doing this at a time that right after we did a 22% budget cut to our college, where we actually, everywhere around the university, we need more resources. HR, finance, grounds, maintenance, everywhere. Student services was really hit. Within our unit, we were hit everywhere. Our staff, upwards of 22 to 25% cuts. We lost faculty, numbers of faculty. Do you remember way back when we had to do our major budget cut? And I think we lost to incentivized and/or retirements about 19 of our faculty. And we were able, because there were so many that took that retirement incentive, we were able to hire back, actually, in the midst of that cut, 8 people back as faculty. Because of so many retirements of our faculty, we were cut a lot, and we reinvested in our faculty needs at that time to cover some of those retirements. So it's coming at a really bad time of this model that we're implementing at a time when enrollments are decreasing. So it's going to be even that much more tough for units that are in the red to do something differently, change in order to increase enrollments when our demographic is going down and they don't have money to reinvest. So it's upon us, I think, in a responsibility way, for us to find ways to work with other colleges as well as our own to invest those dollars wisely, frugally, and strategically. And we can talk a little bit more about that. Any questions about the subvention? And do not be surprised if this gets tweaked along the way. Right? It's a frame, no, right, I know. It's already been tweaked. And there's,
Is this in progress? Is it the?
It's progress. We have transparency. We know at least in the first year, we received, I know Mariann stated this already, in the first year, this year, we got $280,000 back in this model. Believe it or not, after all of this, we got $280,000 back. Some of this was exercised kind of evenly. This wasn't exercised, but it was mostly because of this pool. Okay, so we got some dollars back. Those dollars for this year are one time. Can you imagine? Because by the time we knew where our enrollments were last year and this year, then it was given back based on these rules one time. Next year, they'll be put to our book budget. So there'll be permanent dollars. So there'll always be a lag. And I think I have some of these points on the next slide. No.
Further slides.
Here we go. I think I moved the slides around, flipped them. So this is to somewhat of your question before, Karen. There will always be a 1-year lag in what we get as a one-time, and then it gets put into our book budget. And book budget is really important because those are dollars that we can use for the long term, right? For continuing appointments rather than the short term. But I would say we need to protect against overcommitting of these funds. So we can't go say we're getting 280,000, it's gonna be booked, we're gonna use them all next year. Why? Because we don't know where our enrollments will be.
Well, you're already spending roughly $3 million. You know, that money is
I can't hear you.
you're already you're probably projecting to be subvented $3.8 million based on a prior year model. So you still have some wiggle room there each
Yeah.
year. So if you spend it the prior year, it becomes your expense and you have
Right,
to
yeah,
deposit it.
that's another thing too.
Yeah.
In protecting because, yeah, we don't wanna, we wanna, first of all, we wanna do it strategically. We have priorities and we as unit directors should start, I think I know most of them, but we have to have our priorities on what we do next with those dollars. And I know almost every person has things in the hopper, requests already, I know they do. So we're gonna have to, as a group, prioritize our next investment. But it is all dependent on enrollment. And we get early projections. We have early projections now for fall. It's 100 and maybe 50 days out, 152 days out. I'm gonna go over that a little bit of where we were last year at this time for this year. So, but it requires strategy and successful academic program and course offerings. And again, I would have to emphasize that we should consider not only ROI for the college. Yeah, we can be better, stronger, and or at least we need to get to the place that we are running efficiently. That's probably the first level, right? And then what we can do for the future. So these are a bunch of questions. Before I get to that, we presented, a few of us deans, it was Carla Koretsky out of Arts and Sciences, Dan Guyette out of Fine Arts, Ray Thompson out of Aviation, and myself presented to the Faculty Senate Council on Finance,
Planning and
Budget and,
Finance.
what?
Planning and Finance Council.
Yep, Planning and Finance. And some of this was well received there because even the members of that committee, I think we had Dr. Dennis, Betty Dennis on that committee, didn't even kind of know some of this, and particularly the subvention process moving forward. And they had a number of questions moving into it, and I have some of those here as and I've heard others of frequently asked questions. But let me take a time out before I get to those. Anything with the framework, the subvention, and you have a handout now, all of this will be available to you. We can provide the slides, and then this is being recorded so other folks can listen to this as well. But any questions right now so far? So these are some of the questions. So how will the colleges be adjusting their budgets, both those that get some back and those that don't? As you can imagine, program offerings might be looked at very closely. How many students are in programs? What's the need? Also, of course, maybe not even in these questions is what can we do to increase enrollments, not just in the standard or the typical, or more often with FIDIACs, first-time students, or first time in any college, look of graduates from high school, because that's going down demographically, the number of graduates, but maybe degree completion, RN to BSN, the PTA, OTA, some other things that we could do to help students who are out there in the workforce already complete their degrees. And when you think of it, most of our first year students are taking courses in arts and sciences anyway, or at community colleges or whatever, right? And so the third and fourth years is where they're taking our courses. So that would be a good thing for our college to get students to complete a degree to a bachelor's or a master's or something else with us. So for us, I think there are some great opportunities. Need for long-term subvention, I would say yes. The model even says after 5 years, there will be a level of subvention at about 35%, give or take different tweaks to the model, that the colleges needing subvention will continue to get that subvention. That means for the foreseeable future, we're going to be giving some of our revenue away, and that's okay. It's for the good of the university. This isn't a strict RCM. So there was also concerns if some programs are being cut, or will colleges and departments go about and faculty go about designing whatever they can to make sure revenues come in to their department, their college, or whatever. Some of that has already happened, unfortunately, in anticipation of the RSM or SRM. And I think at the university level, we're being very careful. You know this. If anybody was in some of the faculty senate meetings, even not so much last night, but the last one, there was some huge consternation about some programs teaching then within that college courses that were typically offered in another college. And so we have to guard against that. And then one thing, so that was the spillover impacts and consequences. We have a UPA at about 41.1, the tax. How are cost centers sort of incentivized to be more streamlined? And could we cut that UPA a little bit in order to bring some back to where we are in academia? Probably shouldn't get into publicly on where a big chunk of some of our money goes that is generated by the colleges. It's another auxiliary unit, and that's okay, but it's pretty substantial. But do we need that athletics as part of our university or not? Is it worth our while to have Division I athletics? And that's a strategic discussion. I think it is. I think the hockey team and other teams, gymnastics, and all of those teams bring some cachet to the university, but that could be under discussion as well. Because that's one auxiliary that doesn't break even. If you don't know that already. So, and how will revenue centers and cost centers coexist? Is just something under decreased enrollment especially. So think about it, if our enrollment's decreasing and if we keep 43.15%, the cost centers get less and less money, right? So are we gonna increase the tax, the UPA, so that we make our cost centers whole? And when does that, when do we risk the university? Where the running of a university is almost prohibitive to what we even bring in. So that's going to be an interesting. So we have to be very creative in attracting students to our university in the first place. So I think we've done a number of things already to anticipate this. The collaboration for our health administration degree with the business college, I think we gave up money with that, right? Because we're not teaching all the courses, but they're teaching them, but it's wildly attractive already. We started with 5 students this year. I don't know if you know, we got approval from the Board of Trustees end of June. We couldn't advertise until so there was only 5. We have 35 applications next year already. And we were thinking of 20 to 25. We could open that up. We also looked, well, are we stealing from HSS or from business? A few students who may have been in those majors, but other students that weren't. So it's becoming attractive.
I got a question on that. Are any of those classes going to be the essential West study courses
Yes,
eligible?
yes, some are. Mm-hmm. And West is another way to go, but I think I have that somewhere else. So also, you're an example, Kieran, in the second bullet, the second item on the IHS doc program has a need, the students have a need, and we're going with education and their ability to train on pedagogy and classroom teaching for the future of our doc program. So we're not saying, oh no, we have to teach it here. Now that is a student head count.
This is
So there
graduate
are
program.
students, so we still keep the funding.
It's only for graduate programs,
Graduate
Gotcha.
programs, but we might need to share some of the revenue to cover their costs, and we will, right? And that's okay. So we're interested, Introduction to Adults and Disability course. It's gonna be taught, it's our course, but it's gonna be taught by a faculty member in kind of the same way in education. We're looking at an animal assisted interventions class. Wouldn't that be fun? With Dr. Angie Moe at a undergrad level.
Is that hippotherapy?
What?
Like hippotherapy type of courses?
Well, it could be, but this is with dogs.
Gotcha.
Angie has like 3 dogs trained. We use them at Resiliency Center for Families and Children all the time. They're all around the campus. And we're thinking that a lot of our students in the graduate programs clinically might be very interested in this program. Without even caring about the costs, Carla Kretsky and I said, yeah, let's do this. Let's see how it works. We'll figure it out after. I'm just giving you examples of how we can work together, not against each other. Having our HSS students minor in biology or chemistry, I know we encourage some of that. We won't require it, but it would be a good pathway of students getting that minor to some of our programs. And then one thing that we're doing together as a team, Nancy's leading some of this, is we're looking at those instances where another college is getting all the revenue, yet we have some of the expense. Let me give you an example. In our SPADA and holistic courses, because the funding for graduate student instruction is based on head count of graduate students, not on student credit hours. We have many, for example, graduate students from Education and Human Development in CECP, clinical, taking our holistic or SPADA courses. Well, we're not seeing any of that revenue. So what we're doing is MOUs behind the scenes with education saying, okay, what proportion can you share of that revenue for your student headcount back to us to cover our instruction? So that is happening as well.
Got questions for for graduate students for FT, is they have to have 6 credit hours?
Yep, 6 or more.
So what happens, we have most of our students only carry 1 credit or 2 credit because they're in dissertation. So we don't get anything for them?
You get a portion.
Gotcha.
Point three four.
Okay.
.30, 33?
3-4.
They just do a
3.4.
point, a third of
0.34.
the.
Yep,
Gotcha.
you'll get that. It's your student, they see it, but
Right.
it's under 6, 5 or fewer.
Okay.
Right. So there's just a lot of things we can do. So I talk a lot about pathways, and we're trying to implement at least conceptually what are some opportunities. We're developing, for example, Wes, you brought up an introduction to health and human services professions. We've never had that at the campus level. There are 1,400 students undecided in MERS State, typically every year. Something like that, Melinda, about that level maybe? 1,200? So we need to get out there. It's a West course. It will be a West course. We just put it in, or we are working on
Working on it.
for next fall,
Yeah.
I believe.
Or
So those are ways that we can let students know what the various types of disciplines we have in our college. And so it's been under development with Tiffany and Ann and probably Jan and a few others. Melinda, I'm sure you looked at it. I know you did. And then we've also looked at the credits required or needed for certificate programs. I think we've reduced a few from 18 down to 15 or some version of that. And we're working on that to make it more accessible and still have it useful for licensure and other things by the state and whatever. And then some community needs transfer, articulation agreements, degree completion opportunities. I mentioned that earlier. So we can look for some of those opportunities. We also could look at differential graduate tuition. We can't probably any longer look at differential tuition like some of the other colleges, fine arts, engineering
business.
and business have undergraduate differential. Now here's the trick though, if we do differential, let's say for PA, they're interested. So PA, we could add an increment to per credit hour, but we don't get revenue on the credit hour. But if we make it known that we're charging this much, then business and finance would need to put that in a separate line for our college, that we recover those dollars direct. Yeah, they'll be taxed, but we get those dollars, and then we can even bring it down to the department level, wherever that is. So it's something we could look at cohort sizes. I know Amy did an amazing job of not getting too many students, although it was iffy for a while. She thought maybe too many students enrolled in PT, where we can't, but maybe adding a few for factoring attrition. And there's ways that we could look at, I know it's faculty to student ratios, but we could look at increasing cohort sizes as well. So application fees, course fees, that. Continuing education we can look at, grant and contract funding, and philanthropic support. I am pleased to announce that 2 days ago, Trevor Blocks joined our team. He is being funded by Advancement as our new development officer. He just started. Please give him some time. We're going to announce information about Trevor in our update next week electronically. We give our updates and set forth a mini plan for him to meet pretty much everyone, chairs and directors for sure, and then our leadership team. He will be part of the college leadership team. He'll have an office in our suite of rooms. So he will be here. He's being trained on development over the next 2 to 3 weeks with a number of their systems. So we're excited about that because there's outcomes and markers that he has to meet, and we can help him meet those goals. So I wanted to end with something kind of on the positive. I don't know how positive this is, but we're in the green when it comes to headcount and student hours. This time, compared to this time last year, and now we're about 152 days out from fall. So we're holding our own from last year. But remember, last year, we went down a lot from the previous. So hopefully, we're just holding our own. I don't know that we'll ever, likelihood, undergrad, particularly if we ever go up, unless some programs are wildly successful. But we're holding our own right now with student head count, and up above a little bit in graduate. There might be some other factor working in there. And remember last year, it was the first year where the graduate students could no longer enroll themselves, and maybe, I don't know, we have a better machine to encourage them now to enroll themselves, and maybe we're just ahead of last year, I don't know. But the student credit hours are up with graduate, although it is a little bit with the university, so maybe there's a thing here, maybe we are gaining graduate students. But graduate students, we were going way down over the university particularly, not so much us, was really losing graduate students over. Maybe it's a little bit of a rebound. But you see with WMU, in the larger sense, we're included in those numbers. We're losing students. It's not to the level that we've modeled, we're doing better than the rest of the university in some of the markers. So I wanted to leave with that. So we have some time, I think, about 15 minutes. If there's any questions? I know it's Friday. We really appreciate you being here. Hopefully it helped, and it can set us forward. We'll give you updates all the time. We get a lot of updates through our chairs, directors as well. Ask questions all along. Mariann's always available. Nancy's doing a wonderful work. We call her kind of working on the MOUs and other aspects of making sure that it's almost like behind the scenes types of guidelines, policies, and also MOUs. I know she's worked with a bunch of you on that, so we're here if you need us. Any questions? Good, that's good. No questions is good. All right, thank you.
No quiz.
Thank you, everyone.